Going to wait for Kelly to let us know when we're recording and see if you're going to put everybody on like the panel type setting before we get started. I think Kelly's working on that. So thanks again. And thank you to our panelists. At our executive committee, we started talking about what topics were really important to our members right now. So for today's April membership meeting here for the Ann Arbor Democrats, we're going to be talking about voter suppression bills that have been introduced in our state and across the country. And we have a great panel of 4 experts that have done a lot of work here in our state and know both legal arguments and actions we can take as local Democrats with a legislative, a state legislative slate that are in opposition to these bills. So what can we still do outside of talking to our own elected folks? So I'm going to ask each of you to please introduce yourselves. I'm Karen Rangans. I'm a vice co-chair here with Ingrid Alt of the Ann Arbor Democrats doing our programming work. So thank you for joining us. Let's start. I'm trying to see who's on the screen here. I see Mark Brewer, Erica Piersman, and please correct me if I pronounce your name wrong, John Purich, and we have Senator Irwin here with us today. So let's start. Mark, I see you are unmuted. Please introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll get into some questions.
Sure, Carrie. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Brewer. Among other things, I'm a former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, now a lawyer in private practice, handling a wide variety of election matters, redistricting, campaign finance, and the like for a wide variety of clients, all the way from the League of Women Voters to Planned Parenthood to Progress Michigan, among others. Great to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see, John, you came off mute. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm John Purich. I'm a retired lawyer, but I'm now going into my more activist phase of life, doing a lot of personal things. I also teach at the Michigan State University College of Law, where I've been on the faculty for, I think, 22 or 23 years. And I, like Mark, have been involved in election matters. I'm a little bit older than Mark, so I started in election matters in 1972. And I've had the pleasure of working with Mark and Senator Irwin on many matters over the past, and I'm very eager to be involved in today's proceedings. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Erica, Senator Irwin, either one. Go ahead. Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica Piersman. I'm also a lawyer and currently the voter protection director for the Michigan Dems. I was very involved in the leadership of Promote the Vote, which got Proposal 3 passed. I have not always been an election lawyer. This is a relatively late in life change for me, but I'm very happy to be here today to talk about this very disturbing situation in Michigan.
Thank you. And finally, Senator Irwin, we know you have to leave a little bit early, so you can please introduce yourself and then provide some initial comments before you end up having to leave our meeting today.
Sure. Well, I'm Jeff Irwin. I work for the people of Washtenaw County in the 18th District in the State Senate. I have had the pleasure to work with the other panelists in a variety of different settings, and so it's an honor to join such experts on election law. All 3 of them are attorneys. I am not an attorney, but I am a lawmaker and have had the opportunity to work on election law over the years. I used to serve on the election committee in the state house, but now my focus is in the state Senate. I'm trying to make sure that these voter suppression laws face the maximum opposition in the state Senate. As you may know, there were a raft of bills introduced a couple weeks ago, 39 of them. And in total, they're engineered to make voting more difficult, to make people have invalid votes submitted, to turn people away at the polls, and to make lines longer. The Republicans are doing this because they know that high turnout means Democrats win, and they know that if they can shave just a few of those votes off, that they maybe have a chance. They know that if there's somebody waiting in that line who's a working person, who has to get back to their family, or who has to get back to work, if that line's a little bit longer, that's one more Democrat that might not cast a ballot. And in a close election like 2016, that could tip the balance. And even in an election like 2020, the Republicans were really trying to make it close enough so that they could try to steal it. And so it's a very serious matter. I want to just start by saying I want you all to know that me personally and all of the Senate Democrats have locked arms on this issue, and we're going to be fighting these bills tooth and nail in committee and on the floor. We're going to be making amendments. We're going to be speaking out against them, and we're going to be working with all of you and groups on the outside to make sure that we educate the public and that we push back against what I believe is the real goal here. What the Republicans want to do is not to actually pass these exact bills and have them signed by the governor. The plan here is to do an end around the governor, just like they did with some anti-abortion rights bills back in 2014, because Michigan's Constitution provides an opportunity for direct democracy and for citizens to initiate statutes. And as part of that, if valid signatures are submitted, the legislature has 40 days to enact that petition verbatim without the governor's signature. And so that's what this is all building up to, is an effort to do an end run around the governor and pass a set of laws that the people of Michigan would never vote for and don't support. And so that's why it's so important that we educate. And that's why it's so important that we also push back violently against the worst of these ideas. Because if you look at all 39 of these bills, and I'll stop here in just a second, there's a few of them that are good bills. There's a few of them that are fine, election, clerk training and other training, things like that. That's all fine. There's a few things in here that are good, but what the Republicans are doing right now is they're running this as a trial balloon. They're trying to figure out what is it that they can do that will give them more partisan advantage, that will frustrate valid voters at the ballot box, but that doesn't draw the ire of their voters, that doesn't draw the ire of the independents that they know they need to win. And so that's why it's our job. And I've been working with groups like the Michigan Democratic Party and Michigan Resistance and others to try to get out the word to the voters in these Republican districts about what these bills do. Because I believe that if we can increase the price that they pay from doing wrong, that maybe we can stop them. And certainly, maybe when they actually develop their initiative and their petition, it won't include, some of the worst elements. And so that's how I'm seeing this in the short term. And I'm going to participate as long as I can, but I'm supposed to be picking up trash on the side of the road in Milan for Milan Cares here in about an hour, or about 50 minutes. So I will have to kind of transit. So sorry about the camera being a little wonky during this panel, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here because these bills are of top importance to the people of Michigan and certainly to your senator.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. We're glad to hear that you and the other Senate Democrats are going to be actively fighting and delaying these as much as possible. I'm assuming that the House Democrats are in agreement with you for the most part, and we'll be working with you as well. So I know you have to leave, but I wanted to see if there was anything that you might want to tell us as a group. Is there any actions we can take as non-legislators in, having our representatives already opposed to these bills? Is there anything we can do in your mind for us to think about in the next few weeks before?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do. First off, I think the most important thing we need to do is be educating the public about this. We don't have to worry about the representatives from Washtenaw County or the senator from Washtenaw County taking the wrong vote on this. But I do think that what we need to do is we need to communicate to everyone out there what's actually going on in Lansing. The reason why Republicans are able to sometimes be successful, the reason why they've been able to hold on to the state Senate since Ronald Reagan was president, is because people don't know what's actually happening in Lansing. And so that's why I mentioned a group named Michigan Resistance. There's a fast-growing Facebook group called Michigans Against Voter Suppression that I've joined that's trying to build up that network of people who can reach out to their friends and family across the state and just pass the information, educate people, let folks know what's going on. Because when folks know what's going on in Lansing, that's how we can get some changes to that. So in addition to the groups I've already mentioned, I know that not just Michigan Democratic Party, not just Washtenaw County Democratic Party, but also groups like the ACLU of Michigan, Voters Not Politicians, Legal Women Voters, all those groups are watching this. And what I'm waiting for is, for this legislative piece to work its way through. Because once again, what I said, the Republicans in Lansing are doing right now is this is just a trial balloon. This is just a test run. They're trying to figure out what it is, what's the worst damage they can do to voting rights and get away with it. And we need to make it clear to them that they can't get away with anything. And I think the best way to do that is to call their voters. So for instance, I've been working with Michigan Resistance on this. I think these action alerts go to the WCDP group, calling into, residents who live in, say, Macomb County or Oakland County or Newaygo or Traverse City or Alpena, and just calling those folks and saying, hey, look, here's what's at stake. Here are the bills that are going to be voted on. Will you call your legislator and let them know how you feel? That's how we build the team for what's coming next. Because what's coming next is the Republicans are going to develop an initiative based on, a petition, based on what they think is the most damage they can do to the voters and get away with it. And, I think all this work we're doing now can help us beat that petition, can help us stop them from being successful, can help us build the team that's going to decline to sign and pester those petition gatherers and make sure that they're not able to lie to voters. But then also all that work we do now kind of brushes the Republicans back, I suspect, from some of their worst ideas. Because what I think is going to come out is they're going to take all 39 of these bills, most of them terrible, and they're going to strip it down to the ones that they think they can get away with. Things like voter ID. That's a terrible idea that makes lines longer, that will reject valid voters from being able to participate, but that, in the minds of your average voter, if they don't really think about it, they just think, yeah, I need an ID to buy alcohol. Why not my ID to vote? It seems, so we need to educate people about why that's a problem, about, why that presents a financial barrier to people, how that makes lines longer, how that could result in someone's ballot being, forced to be cast as an envelope ballot that then maybe won't be counted. This is about making sure that valid voters in Michigan aren't able to cast a vote. And we need to communicate that to folks, and so that they know that voter ID is not some innocuous thing that the Republicans are going to try to make it sound like. So that's what I think we need to do. And I'm sure that all the other panelists have, intelligent things to say about the details of these bills. I've got lots of notes on them, but in sum total, that's what I'm trying to do, is just educate people about what this is really about. This is about voter suppression. We believe in voter rights. And if we want to stand up to make voting easier, this is not the way to do it. I mean, I think the worst idea, I'll one more and I'll stop. The worst idea here perhaps is this idea that as an absentee voter, you need to take a copy of your license and send it in along with your absentee voter application. That's going to gum up the process so much, right? And what happens when people fail to do that? Then you got to wait for the mail to come back again. It's just, this is all.
That's going to affect Republicans too.
It is going to affect Republicans too. And we want to make voting easier for everyone. If our ideas are not the ideas that are going to win the day, then we shouldn't win. And so anyway, so we need to make sure that people know exactly what they're proposing, because what they're proposing is dastardly, and it's anti-voter, it's anti-citizen, and it's ugly. And so my goal is in trying to get that word out.
Thank you. And thank you. I know we have multiple panelists. I just wanted to give you a chance to provide comments before you have to leave. So any initial comments from any of the other panelists before we move into a brief presentation? Erica, I know you are prepared to give us a little bit of a presentation here today. Any other initial comments from the other panelists? Not yet. There's a lot of details we can get into. And we'll be sharing some details in links in the chat, and later when we post this on our website, we can share some additional resources. Erica, are you ready to start with your presentation? You should be able to share your screen.
Let me see if I can do that.
Perfect.
All right. So what I wanted to do here was give a little context, because I think that is really important for our messaging. So I think we all know what the big lie is, and it was very effective. They were very, very successful in sowing doubt about the integrity of the election. And even though the courts didn't buy it, even though, the insurrection did not result in the overturning of the election, we've now got this situation where legislatures all over the country are rushing to fix problems that do not actually exist, but that many of their constituents believe exist. And that's the problem, because the big lie was used to cause people to believe that there are problems with the integrity of our elections.
Erica, do you mind putting this in presentation mode just to make it a little bit bigger for our folks
sorry.
watching?
Let's see.
In your top right corner, there's a button that says present.
Yeah, but yes, got it. Um,
Thank you.
is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Um, and I think when you look at what's really going on, it's a little scary. Look at these numbers from a poll from the end of the last month. 55% of Republicans believe that Trump's election loss resulted from illegal voting, and 74% of Americans favor new limits to protect elections from fraud. This is how successful the big lie was. And here's some more data that is pretty interesting. This is from the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, which does this survey every year. And they found that nationwide, so they asked people, how confident are you that your own vote was counted properly, that your state's votes were counted properly, and that overall in the country, our votes were, counted as intended. So in the nationwide vote count, there's a 71-point gap in confidence. So Democrats, 93% of Democrats are strongly, or I forget the terminology, but basically are confident in the election results, whereas only 22% of Republicans are. And then when you ask people in Michigan, how confident are they in the Michigan vote count, it's even higher. So 96% of Dems are confident, but only 22% of Republicans. So that's a 74% gap. And it's bigger than any place else in the US and, above the nationwide gap. So I think that's where we are. That's where the Republicans have put us. The GOP here was very, very good at amplifying the big lie. Remember the House and Senate Oversight Committee hearings where they were investigating claims of voter fraud, including the one with Giuliani. And, we had their participation in the Stop the Steal events. And we had elected officials, signing on to the Supreme Court lawsuit, state representatives supporting the Supreme Court lawsuit, to overturn the election results. And then on the night of the insurrection, we had Bergman, McClain, and Wahlberg objecting to both the Arizona and the Pennsylvania election results. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the names of these senators who sent a letter to Congress and Pence that, sort of repeated all these claims of election fraud. These are the same senators who have been introducing these bills. All of these folks, their names are on these bills. And this, I think, was a deliberate, chain of events, so mistrust in the election, and then you can pass legislation to make voting harder, specifically voting by Democrats. These, I've sort of broken down the bills, and we can talk about, I don't know how much detail we want to get into, but these are the themes. This is what I see as the themes. Create unnecessary barriers to voting, encourage or allow voter intimidation of both voters, election workers, and observers, increase partisan interference in election administration, which is really dangerous, hamper the work of election officials, eliminate or jeopardize election funding, federal and philanthropic funding, but of course, don't replace it with state funding, and then undermine citizens' initiatives. I don't know if we want to get into the details of the bills now. I have some slides on that, but maybe we want to let the other panelists say something at this point.
Well, I'm curious, I think we could get a little bit of an overview of some of the bills in case folks haven't gone through them.
Okay.
I know that we don't need to get in detail on every single bill. There are 39 of them.
So I don't have slides on 39 of them, but I've, here's some details. So we've got 3 bills that deal with strict photo ID. And as Senator Irwin said, these are really awful bills. And if you get a provisional ballot because you didn't present photo ID at the polls, in order to cure that ballot and get it counted, you have to present proof of residency in addition to ID, even though you were in the poll book, which I find, doubly outrageous. Then there's other bills that would make absentee voting harder. Limit use of drop boxes, can't use them after 5 p.m. on the day before the election. Prohibit prepaid postage on absentee ballot return envelopes, even though the city or township agrees to do it. No, the state says no. And then prohibiting the Secretary of State from sending out absentee ballot applications, or even from having the application on her website. Think about that. Our absentee ballot application would be top secret. It's not allowed to be on the website, which I think may make it harder for third-party groups to distribute those applications. And then this little one that they threw in there, a statement on the voter registration application that the voter doesn't claim voting residence or the right to vote in another state. What the hell does that mean? Nobody knows. But what the effect will be, especially for students and people who've moved from other states, is to make them think twice about registering, which is of course exactly what they want to do. Some bills that would increase intimidation. One that would allow poll challengers and poll watchers to videotape and take photographs in precincts and absentee counting rooms. Think about that. Think about how much chaos and disruption that could cause. Because of course, the number of poll watchers is unlimited. So you could potentially have hundreds of people doing that. Allow more partisan challengers and then more types of challenges. So get rid of nonpartisan challengers like the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Allow challengers from candidates as well as political parties, and then increase the types of things that they can challenge. So the result of all that would be, vastly larger numbers of GOP challengers engaging in more voter intimidation and delay tactics in our precincts and absentee counting boards. Then the partisan interference in elections. This one hasn't been talked about that much, but there are 3 bills that would give more power to boards of canvassers. These are unelected boards, right? And their role is ministerial. It's to canvass the votes and certify the elections. But these bills would give them additional discretionary powers over drop boxes, absentee ballot containers, and the hiring of the assistants for the clerks to conduct the canvass. Then there's a bill that would allow to increase the number of members on the county boards of canvassers, but only in large counties. And what are the large counties? Primarily Democratic, of course. And then require at least 2 members of each political party on those larger boards to approve any election. So it's like adding a supermajority requirement for the boards of canvassers, which is clearly going to increase the likelihood of partisan blockage of Board of Canvasser elections, which is, again, exactly what they want. They want more chaos. They want boards to refuse to certify elections, even though they're required to do so. And then adding a partisan element to the audits of all things. They want to allow political parties to videotape the audits, and then requiring clerks, instead of having their staff conduct the audits, require the clerks to appoint election inspectors from each party to conduct the audits. I think the last thing we need in audits is partisan influence. Then they want to hamper the work of election officials. This one's great. Make it a misdemeanor for the Secretary of State and for county and local clerks to use their name or likeness on any election-related communications paid for with public money. So that means educational materials. It means election inspector recruitment. It means everything that the clerks do. And keep in mind that in many, many communities, the local clerk is a trusted source for election information. So we want to reduce the ability of these trusted sources to give information about our elections and pave the way for disinformation to come from third parties. And then there's a requirement that there be no more than 2 election inspectors from one political party for every one from the other. And this would simply be impossible to achieve in most municipalities, which is what our current law recognizes. It says you do it as much as practicable. And I think it might lead to attempts to throw out the votes in the places where the standards are not met. Because it's written in a way that it doesn't say what the consequence is, but you can bet what they will try to make the consequence. And then there's some about election funding and citizens initiatives. There's a couple bills that would prohibit the state and all local government units from accepting philanthropic funding for election administration. Michigan got a lot of philanthropic funding last year that gave us the ability to have all those drop boxes, that allowed for the satellite locations, that really helped our clerks run the elections. They want to get rid of that. And they want to say that federal funding that's received for election purposes has to be returned if it's not appropriated by the legislature in a budget act within 90 days. I think we know where that's headed. And with citizen initiatives, just make it harder to collect signatures for initiative petitions. They want to reduce the signature gathering period by 40 days. So that would mean that the new deadline for the November ballot would be mid-April rather than late May, thereby, of course, eliminating one of the warmer months for signature collection. So that's my quick overview. I think I got all the really horrible ones, but we can talk more about the details.
Wow, great. Thank you so much for that overview. I know, John and Mark, you have studied these kinds of bills for years. What is your legal opinion on some of what is being introduced? I mean, would any of this even stand up in court if these were enacted and, theoretically signed by the governor, which is unlikely?
Let me take a quick shot if I could, Mark. First, number one, I think many of the provisions in many of the bills, and I do agree with the earlier comment that I think Senator Irwin made, that there are some parts of these bills that are meritorious. Not many, but there are some. And I think that's part of the strategy, to throw a little bit of good in with all of the bad. Number two, I think many of the provisions are unconstitutional and would be deemed unconstitutional. That's way down the road, though, unfortunately. And I thought Erica did a marvelous job of articulating with a lot of clarity and simplicity what these bills are intended to do. What if we really want to, let me start with one or two premises. Number one, elections are not perfect. And I do agree that the big lie sort of took this to a new point. But the reality is elections are not perfect. They're pretty damn close to being perfect, but they're not perfect. And there have always been errors and mistakes that have occurred in elections. If we truly want to look at reforming a few simple things that would perhaps give people more confidence, right now, under the provisions of the Michigan election law, you can't recount a precinct unless the poll book and the tally of the ballots match identically. One of the things that would be very, very, I think, simple, that might go a long way to alleviating this fear factor, is changing the recountability of precincts. Instead of saying they have to match, to say they have to be within 1 vote, 2 votes, or 3 votes, so that many of the clerical errors that result in the non-recountability of precincts could be achieved. I think that's the kind of reform that we should be talking about. And I'm looking forward to testifying from my experience and my role. And as Mark knows, I've represented Republicans, Democrats, and independents over the last 50 years. Unlike Mark, who's much more partisan in terms of his clientele, I didn't have that privilege. I was a junkyard dog, and I sort of, whoever wanted to hire me, I went after it because I'm a poor guy from coal mining country in Pennsylvania, and I needed the money. I'm just kidding a little bit. But the reality is there are positions that we could articulate that I think that would foil many of the arguments that Erica pointed out in the presentation that are pretty straightforward. I'd like to see mail-in voting for all citizens like we have in 6 or 7 states in the United States that are absolutely perfect. My son and daughter-in-law live in Seattle. My grandson voted for the first time using a mail-in ballot. The entire system is run that way. Another change that would be very, very effective, as opposed to these draconian efforts to limit participation in voting, is to let clerks start to do the count in a reasonable period of time, much like many of the jurisdictions that were not complained about in terms of their accuracy, Florida being the best example, that counted all of their ballots that were early votes long before election night. And I didn't hear any hue and cry about them. And one other point I'd like to make, I think Erica's really hit the nail on the head here. The reality is the arguments that there was something nefarious or untoward that occurred not only in Michigan, but in these other jurisdictions. If you look at the facts, there's no facts there. But the reality is the people who are responding are not looking at the facts. They're looking at the philosophy and they're looking at the hype. And to the extent that we can highlight the reality, and I can't go through all the bills with the preciseness that Erica did this morning, but we don't need to have larger board of canvassers. We don't need to make it a super majority so that all 4 members, or this nonsense to increase the board of canvassers to 6 or 8 is just ridiculous. This is, and she hit the nail on the head. This is a ministerial process. It's ingrained in the Michigan Constitution with regard to the creation both of the state board of canvassers and now has been done at the local level with the county boards of canvassers. Having lived through hundreds of boards of canvassers meetings at both the county level and at the state level, this is the most boring and tedious kind of process, but that's what it is. It's ministerial. It's not political. It is in absolutely no ways intended to be substantive. It is a process which is much like an accountant going over the preparation of the filing for an income tax report. That's what it is, making sure that all the I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed. And I think that the insanity that occurred in those legislative hearings when Giuliani and that whacked out woman was testifying, and again, the fact that Chris Thomas, the former state elections director, was involved in the oversight of the activities at TCF Center was probably the saving grace for the outcome of the Michigan election. Because anyone who knows Chris's politics is a lot smarter than I am, because I don't think he has any politics. Have I or Mark always agreed with him with regard to decisions he's made when he was state elections director? The answer is no, we haven't. But I think he's been fair, and I think his fairness was a saving grace when we went through this last debacle. Again, we don't need more people involved in the canvass process. We don't need more challengers involved. I look forward to testifying before these committees as these bills are being considered, and really to bring reality to this process as opposed to the hype that's been included. So I probably talked too much and said things that are too inflammatory. So Mark, what are your comments?
Thanks, John, very much. I'll be brief. Everything that's been said so far, I agree with Erica. That was a terrific presentation. Thank you very much for that. This is the largest attempted rollback of voting rights in Michigan history. And we let that sink in. Even if this package is pared down, as I think Senator Irwin indicated, I think he's right in terms of what the ultimate initiative will say, it's still going to be the largest rollback. But on the other hand, we may not have seen everything that they propose. I got to tell you, I expected to see things in this legislative package that aren't there. I'm not going to suggest them publicly in this forum, but there are things that I expected the Republicans would try to do that they're doing in other states that aren't in this package. We'll just have to wait to see what emerges legislatively. Let me try to direct myself to Carrie's question in terms of legal claims and those kinds of things. Whether this is adopted directly by the legislature at some point, or it ends up on the ballot and the voters adopt it, and that's a whole separate conversation. It's a possibility here in the end. I think there are a wide variety of legal claims that can be brought. How specific that's going to be is going to depend on what's in the package. So I can only talk in generalities here. I see in the chat, people have already asked, well, don't some of these things violate Proposal 3? Yes, they do. And I think Erica adverted to that. The burdens on absentee voting, for example. I think there are a lot of arguments there that many of those would violate Proposal 3, but other restrictions that are possible that are in this package could violate Proposal 3. On photo ID, John's former boss, our revered former Attorney General Frank Kelly, opined back in the 90s that the current photo ID law is unconstitutional. He was subsequently overturned by the Engler Michigan Supreme Court, but I think Frank Kelly had it right. And there will be vigorous litigation against any kind of photo ID requirement, even though it's very popular with the public. That is a problem. That is a solution in search of a problem. There is no documented evidence in this state ever of somebody showing up at a polling place attempting to impersonate somebody else. It's never happened. So it's clearly a device intended to discourage people from voting. There could be other legal claims brought. Erica mentioned that this enlargement of the county canvassing boards targets large counties. 7 of the 9, and soon perhaps 8 of the 10. I think Livingston's going to join the group. Washtenaw in the group under the current legislation. Are vote Democratic, generally at the top of the ticket. So there could be claims of partisan discrimination. There could be claims of racial discrimination. Michigan has a very strong, not much litigated, but a strong so-called purity of elections clause, which the case law indicates requires voters to be treated equally. I think there are good arguments that, particularly on the canvassing provisions and otherwise, voters are not being treated equally. I think there are equal protection arguments under the state constitution that could be brought. And I'll just wrap up with this, Carrie. I keep stressing state constitution because I think that's where we have to go if we end up in court. The federal courts, packed with Trump judges, particularly at the appellate court level, very hostile. We need to assert our state constitutional rights in these kinds of situations, not only attacking whatever substantive provisions get adopted, but I'm a big fan of fighting this not only in legislature, but on the ground. There's already, as I think Senator Irwin mentioned, a decline to sign campaign operating on Facebook. I'd urge people to join that and try to stop a petition drive when it comes. And I think we've got to challenge the petitions if and when they are filed. We've got to do this, I think, every step of the way. We cannot give up any defense to this. Ultimately, we may end up in court with whatever a legislature adopts, but this is so serious, we cannot afford, I think, to give up on any defense. It's got to be what I call defense in depth. So that, Carrie, kind of covered my opening remarks as well as answering your question. So thank you.
Thank you. So thinking of these points of defense, as you're calling it, right? We've got bills introduced now. We can fight against those bills. We have Senator Irwin and others adding amendments, trying to do any sort of delay and draw this out as long as possible before they might get voted on. They might get, passed and sent to the governor sometime, maybe over the summer. We all think she'll veto these, and then there'll still be a number of months to initiate a petition drive. So, assuming that we get to that point, the petitioning could start maybe this summer, maybe this fall, and have to be completed by next spring. And then it could be on the ballot in 22. Is there, you mentioned the defense we could play to decline to sign, to talk to folks, to not sign the ballot initiative, the petitions. And then, of course, we could have people vote against it if it does get on the ballot. So those are like places that we know might be coming down the pike. Did I miss anything of areas where we could play defense a little bit between now and then, outside of, what Senator Irwin said earlier about educating our fellow constituents across the state?
So if I may, of course, my colleagues are going to jump in, I'm sure. Look, Senator Irwin only has 35 colleagues at this point. The Republican majority in the Senate is only 2018, if my numbers are correct. And so I would not give up at all on lobbying. You're not going to have to lobby your own legislators, but I think we need to target some Republican senators and some House members. The House margin is 58-52. Blocking it in the legislature is not a permanent solution, but I think it sends a signal, at least, in terms of that. So I think we need to do that. The decline to sign, that can be a very confrontational and ugly process, but I think it needs to be engaged in. And I'm glad to see that groups are organizing on that front as well. And then again, even if an initiative gets approved and the legislature, as Senator Irwin describes, has the 40 days, we should not give up on trying to persuade a handful of Republicans to vote no. We should never give up on the legislative front. So those are my observations in response to your questions, Gary.
Any
And
other
just to
panelists?
add a little bit to that, if I may just jump in and add a little bit to that, all of
Yes,
that
please.
work that we do to lobby against these bills, to reach out to people across the state, friends, family, contacts, coworkers, anyone, to educate them and turn them out to contact their legislator, all of that work not only helps us maybe stop these bills in the legislature, but also educates the public, activates the public, gets them involved in what's happening in state government. Because, you know, the most effective way for us to stop this in the legislature is also the most effective way to stop it through the petitioning process, which is to make sure that everybody knows that these ideas are all about reducing voting, making it a little bit harder to vote. And that adds up to a political price for the Republicans for advancing these bad ideas. So, you know, just to put it in the context of the politics we're going to be facing next year, you know, Mark is right. They're down a couple of members, so their majority is thinner right now. But, you know, next year they're going to be on the ballot in a historic election with new maps. Senate Dems picked up 5 seats last time. We need to pick up 3 more to have majority. And so they're worried. And they're currently holding on to a number of districts where there are more Democrats in the district than Republicans, and they know we're going to get new maps. So we need to make them believe, and we also need to make it true that if they do this, they're going to pay a political price. And the advantage of that is not just how it helps us on every progressive issue we care about, but also how it helps educate the public should they divert their strategy and go to the ballot and start trying to get signatures, which is what I expect to be the next shoe to drop.
Mm-hmm. Erica, John, comments?
Yeah, I think we really need to keep talking about the fact that the 2020 election in Michigan was secure and accurate. We had 250 audits performed, and every single one of them confirmed the results that were reported in November. And, you know, the audits really didn't get the kind of media play that the lies did, of course, because audits are boring, whereas, you know, election fraud is very sexy. So I think we really need to drive home the point that this is all a solution in search of a problem. While there may be some minor things in Michigan election law that need to be fixed, and we've talked about some of them here, this package is not that. This package really is addressed at a problem that doesn't exist, a problem that they deliberately created in the minds of their supporters.
Mm-hmm. John,
And if I could follow up, Carrie, with one other point, and I think to Jeff's point and to Mark's point that have been made. Number one, the Republican and Democratic clerks at the local level in the state of Michigan had no participation in the drafting of this quote unquote reform package. There is a lot of angst amongst Republican clerks that they didn't want or didn't need these kinds of suggestions to be made. I think we need to target those kinds of people. And I think many of them are very, very eager to come up and say, don't screw around in our playground. We know how to run our playground quite well. And quite honestly, they're doing things that would just make everything more difficult for the clerks. And I think Erica's point about audits is really important. We need to do something in some way to publicize the efficiency of the election and the accuracy of the election. And again, audits, I agree, are boring, but the reality is they're the proof positive of the fact that our election system works. It works incredibly well. Think about running any other system where you have to bring together all of the equipment, all of the planning, all of the activities, and jam it into one day, which is what the normal election day process is like, and to come up with the efficiency of the election process. Our election process is pretty incredible from top to bottom, and we need to herald that much more than just sit back and try to defend against these little quirks that are being thrown up all the time. So I think, you know, reaching out to Republican and Democratic clerks throughout the state, a lot of especially the rural Democratic and Republican clerks are really outraged that what's going on here. And Jeff, I don't mean to tell anyone how to run the Senate, but the reality is the more input that we get from people from rural Michigan to say, this is going to affect us the same way as it's going to affect the large counties and the large cities. And we don't need that. We just don't need that. So I think anything we can do in that regard is going to be very helpful. And Jeff, I hope you did take my comment to heart. I'm willing to stand up and say anything on these issues before any hearings, because quite candidly, I think I bring a little bit of rationality to some of these comments, having been on both sides of the aisle for such a long time, because a lot of these people just don't know what they're talking about. They really don't know what they're talking about. And we need to publicize the good of the election system, and we need to publicize the badness that's associated with almost every one of these proposals. Can you imagine having clerks, imagine having board of canvassers with 6 or 8 members where you have to have uniformity of all members to vote to certify an election? It would be a nightmare. And to Mark's point about the courts, I agree that ultimately many of these things, even if enacted by a petition drive, and again, we're talking about 2 separate fronts, that's going to take time, and that's going to interfere in the election process. And with redistricting coming up, I'm sure we're going to have litigation about that also. So I think we have to keep all of these fronts open for attack and for information as simultaneously as we can. Sorry, I'm sounding so disjunctive, but I there's so much here. There's just so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's 39 bills today, and you know, this is part of a little bit of a longer game. So there's a lot to dissect here. You know, thinking about how misinformation travels quickly, conspiracy theories travel quickly through social media. You know, there is some movement in other states, like our city councilwoman Nelson mentions that there's a work going on in Ohio to regulate false election statements. Is there anything that we could do as far as that here in Michigan? Maybe introduce some state legislation around that kind of defensive move.
Well, there has been legislation introduced. I mean, we have seen, and John and I have seen this on both sides, you know, a lot of misleading statements in connection with ballot questions. But I'll tell you, there's some pretty strong free speech and First Amendment restraints on trying to regulate that. And the courts here in Michigan have been pretty firm on that front. Now, if you violate the restrictions in terms of the content of what has to go in a petition, that's kind of one way to get at it. You know, the summary has to be fair and accurate, and there are legal standards for that. But in terms of trying to regulate what somebody on the street says, advocating somebody to sign a petition, yeah, I'm afraid that kind of legislation is most likely unconstitutional. We're just not going to get anywhere with that.
It was also in relation to campaigning, maybe outside of petition campaigns too, but I mean, it would still have to be something brought up and litigated after the fact, it sounds like, right? You know, there isn't going to be a pre-approval process. So the misinformation or the, you know, conspiracy theory would still get out, and then the correction, of course, never goes as far.
First Amendment law is quite clear about really being hostile to what's called prior restraints of speech. And so what I think you're likely to get, and I'm glad these are happening, are the lawsuits like Dominion is bringing against a wide variety of lawyers and others who brought these frivolous lawsuits. But unfortunately, as you indicate, that is after the fact.
Right. And the misinformation does spread faster. And, you know, the thing that gets people's immediate outrage on social media is what is going to be shared more than the, oh, I guess I was wrong. People don't really share that kind of content on social media.
If I can just add, Mary, I'm sorry, I think we do need to think about very seriously regulation of social media. And there's a vigorous debate going on now. Should we treat them like telephone companies, which is what they claim to be basically, and say we're not responsible for content? Or do they have a more affirmative obligation in terms of providing access for all viewpoints, something we used to call the fairness doctrine? But again, there are countervailing ideas in terms of free speech as well. But I do think, and I'm glad to see the Congress doing that, we need to have more regulation of the social media companies.
Well, maybe that's a topic we can have in a future programming session here with the Ann Arbor Democrats. So we do have about 10 more minutes. I see Senator Irwin he's going to have to join his other thing here quickly. He started us with giving us some actions that we can take. He suggested educating and contacting our friends, colleagues, families across the state. John, you talked about talking to more folks in rural areas. You're all talking a little bit about don't give up on doing some legislative advocacy with the senators across the state. And maybe we can stop this before it makes it past the legislative phase and into a petition phase. Is there other kinds of actions that you can think of that we could take, as a local club here? We're a local Democratic Party. Is there work we could do to coordinate with maybe some smaller Democratic parties in other parts of the state? What do you recommend from what having more of a statewide view?
But I think that's a possibility. I have two ideas. One, Carrie, that you can, as John and Eric and others have suggested, put your voices behind clubs and county parties and so forth in other parts of the state. It's very easy now to do, phone lobbying and emails and so forth, even if you're not from the district. That's one thing I would do. The second thing I would mention that I think there's a possibility that may be of interest to folks, I think there are going to be recall, I'll just call them threats, made against these legislators who are sponsoring these bills and or who vote for them. I'll leave to your judgment whether you want to get involved in those. Those won't occur in your county, but you can work on a recall campaign, whether it's in Washington or not.
Right. And, the indivisible groups that sprouted up are also, many of them are still active across the state, and some of the swing left groups are still active. Maybe working with some of those folks, we can think about doing some organizing from here to there as well. John, I see you came off mute.
Well, I want to reiterate what Mark just said on recalls, because I think this is a very, very valuable option that most people just shy away from. But the reality is you can get the petition language certified, which in many instances has been a circus in and of itself, but you get publicity from that. And to Erica's point about how do you bring information out, these things are covered by the media. And when you put information in the language, there is a debate about what's going on. And all of a sudden, you've got a forum, you're going to get free media, and it gets really statewide coverage at that point. Again, recalls are incredibly difficult to ever succeed. First of all, you need 25% of the total vote for governor in the last preceding election to even qualify. You only have 90 days to get the signatures. But oftentimes, just the effort is worth the publicity and the information. So it's been one of my favorite sort of ideas. I get shot down by many people about ever doing it, but I think it's a very valuable one, especially in some of these districts where I think several of the sponsors of these bills are way, way, way beyond what their constituents really believe. And I think that can bring more pressure on them than just about anything else. And it's not expensive to put together the language for a recall petition, and it's not expensive to go before the State Board of Canvassers with the language, and all of a sudden you've got that publicity and you've got the information getting out there about what they're trying to do and why you're trying to stop them. So I really echo Mark on that point.
And I know, we're coming up to the end of our hour here. There are plenty of resources. We mentioned a number of groups working on this. There's been some links put into the chat here. There are, plenty of actions we can take as a group, and we can revisit this if there's particular official action that we want to take as a local party. Erica, I see you have come off mute. Do you want to add another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the MDP is working on strategies to get out to the county parties and the clubs. Our thought was that, we didn't want to start phone calls to senators' offices while the legislature was on break, but they're back on Monday. And so watch for information coming out from the MDP to help, guide and direct on the fight back.
Great. Thank you. Yes, that's good. That'll help us coordinate a little bit from, areas in the state like where we live in the Ann Arbor area, where we can maybe put our people power into other areas where we can have more of an impact, because we've already got our folks convinced here to be in opposition to this. Well, any final comments? We really appreciate this. We're a group that likes to learn about really important issues and take action. And, we've got, Mark, your new podcast that's going on that had a few episodes recently really about a lot of these particular issues here and across the country. There's been some Michigan radio interviews and commentaries on this. So folks, there's plenty of a little bit more digging you can do. But any final comments before we wrap up? We like to wrap up right at noon.
No, Carrie, I just want to add thank you for this forum, which I think was very, very useful and helpful, and just really emphasize the need for grassroots activism on this. Demonstrating the power of that, obviously, with last year's election in 2018, with what we did there. So we should not give up on that, and fight this thing in every way we can over the next year and a half.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Mark, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for being activists. I mean, we really saw last year what the power of the people can do. If anybody watched the Wayne County Board of Canvassers meeting, that was unbelievable, because that was a real grassroots effort that came together really quickly and kept that from going completely off the rails. And it was close. And so I think if we ever needed an example, and of course there were, hundreds and thousands of examples of activism in Michigan last year that gave us the victories that we had. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to also say thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning and to have an opportunity to discuss both the bills, the potential petition, and the things that can be done. I agree with Erica and Mark with regard to so many of the suggestions. But it's time to get to work, because these things are going to start to move now, and we need to make sure that we continue to echo these points over and over and over. So thank you again for the opportunity, and have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you. Any comment, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for paying attention all the way through. This is an incredibly important issue, and I really believe, like other panelists, that this is one where if we do the work, if we educate people, if we communicate about why these ideas are bad, we can make a big difference in protecting people's voting rights. So I just appreciate all the activists and fellow panelists for being here today to, communicate this important message, because, if what happens in Lansing stays in Lansing, then Democrats aren't going to get a majority. But if we can get that word out about the dastardly business that Republicans are up to in Lansing on voting rights and a range of other issues, then we can take advantage of the momentum we have. Hopefully reelect our excellent governor and have Democratic majorities in the legislature.
Thank you. All right, well, that concludes our panel today on the voter suppression activity here in our state. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, Erica, Mark, Jeff. This was terrifying and